muting the mic. I reckon that might work. Should we try that? Yeah, okay, all right. So what I was going to ask you, Jem, is if you can tell us really a bit about Raina, what it stands for, and why you felt the need to set Raina up. I'm going to turn my mic off and let you go, okay? You've gone, Jem. You might have to put your mic back on, and I'll put mine off.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Right, I had myself on. Sorry. But yeah, I started Raina back in February due to a very difficult situation that I was left in. I'm going to try and say this without saying too much at the same time, but essentially it resulted in me no longer having full residency of my children. So it I had a good few weeks of just being a shell of who I am, and kind of just thought, well, this is not, this isn't okay. Why has this happened? And that kind of led me to, I had reached out to people like on my personal page, and so many people were contacting me saying, I've been through this, or I went through this donkeys ago, and they couldn't believe that it was still happening. So I was kind of like, oh my God, like this is a well-known, well, I say well-known very loosely, this is a worldwide issue that it's like continuing, and it was just so strange to me how, I'm trying to word this in a way that I'm trying to word this in a way that's not going to get me into trouble. But yeah, so it was kind of like, this can't continue. And I then just created Raina in the chance of hopefully making proper change, really. But yeah, still going, still plodding. It's just trying to raise that awareness now to almost, because it's such a dark it's not if you've never been through family court, you don't know, like you won't know how bad it actually is. So I feel like the awareness that needs raising is more of the outcomes that can actually come out of family court, because they're deadly. There are women who commit suicide and men who get really, really poorly and end up with like autoimmune diseases, and I think we need that awareness of what truly goes on inside family court, really.
Absolutely, Jem. Absolutely. I'm just, first of all, just want to say thank you for sharing. I know that you can't say too much because obviously it's a live case going on. So obviously we won't expect you to talk about, your own case, but it's good to know where the foundations have come from and where Raina has come from. And what does it stand for again, Jem?
So Raina stands for Reform Against Institutional Neglect and Abuse, which is kind of, because I don't just go into family court, it's all the other systems that are kind of on the back foot of family court as well. CAFCAS, social care. So it's kind of, that's why I wanted to add the institution, because it's a big ball of systems, isn't it? That kind of just absolutely. And it's you're not just looking at family court, are you? Like you said, you've got CAFCAS, you've got NIAS, you've got the social workers, you've got solicitors, barristers. It's like there's an army of them, and they're part of that big beast, that big system, and it's just you against them all, isn't it? And it's terrifying. It is terrifying. And I was going to talk a little bit about, because I know that you help to support other survivors since this has happened as well through Raina, and I know a lot of women, they reach out to you because they trust you, that they've got an idea of what's happened, your situation, and a lot of people have reached out to you, haven't they, to speak to you about what's happening with them. And the same with myself. A lot of victims of domestic abuse who are going through family court will reach out to me,
And in fact, it makes me so sad that I can't get back to every single one of them. And I think what's even sadder is there's nothing really out there to identify post-separation abuse as an issue of its own. You know, you'll get domestic abuse services, but there's nothing really, is there, for post-separation abuse as such. So, you know, I felt compelled to go out there to do my best. And if I couldn't help every survivor, then at least we could try and raise awareness so that others know that they're not going through this alone, because it's the most lonely, isolating experience, isn't it, that, you know, that one can go through. And as you rightly said, if you haven't been through the family court, then you don't understand how awful it is. The general public have no idea what is going on. And of course, you can't say too much about it because you are threatened with prison, you're threatened with contempt of court, the criminal record, and it's really quite terrifying. So I think it's about time that we broke this taboo and we had these conversations. You know, when I was going through it, there was nobody anywhere talking about it really, you know, and I didn't even have a name for it. I knew it was wrong. Yeah. And I thought to myself, is this domestic abuse? Because it can't be, because I'm not still living with the perpetrator. So what is this limbo land that I'm in? I've left this abusive relationship. And it wasn't until about 5 years into family court that I discovered that I was actually in the midst of post-separation abuse. It was finally a name and a label to it. And it made it more tangible. It was a real thing, you know? So to see organisations as well, like Raina, I know Right to Equality as well. There are other, you know, Claire Throstler's been championing changes in the family court, you know, and it's so heartening to see that people are now starting to identify and break this taboo, you know, and we're being brave and speaking about it, especially for those who can't, Jemma, you know, it's tough, isn't it? And what I was going to ask you though, in the 5 years that I went through family court, I came out of family court in 2023, and it was bad then, you know, it was really bad then, but actually I think it's worse now than it was then. And I know that, you know, we speak to survivors, don't we, about this, you know, and I was just wondering if you could perhaps tell us a little bit about what the women are saying to you. What sort of, you know, what are the patterns going on in family court at the moment? You know, what are the worst kind of things that you know of that are going on for women who, particularly who fled domestic abuse, and their children, their co-survivor children in family court?
I tend to, it was, you know, when you say that it was worse now than it was then, it just popped into my head because I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying, but my mother went through family court back a long time ago. Yeah, not involving me, it was involving, I won't go into too much detail, but and she ended up with a result that was not the nicest of results. So when you think back on that now, you're talking 35 years ago, 40 years ago almost. So a long time. And yeah, so the women that I get who contact me, there seems to be a common theme within when people message, and it tends to be either they've had no fact find with their domestic abuse allegations, or they have had alienation allegations. Those two, it seems to be that PD12J in general is just completely and utterly not even a factor in the proceedings, or it's suddenly an allegation claim that results in the removal of their children. And I think it's so difficult because I've also heard of a lot of cases where they've not even had an allegation of alienation, and the domestic abuse hasn't even been a factor in the proceedings. So, you know, we hear about the cases quite often now about the alienation allegations, but actually I think it stems from making just ignoring PD12J as a whole. But those seem to be the ones that I get the most. I tend to get women who contact me, and it is mostly women, as we know, both sexes go through family court, but I predominantly get women who contact me who say that they are either in the midst of essentially knowing that they're going to get their children taken away, because it's been kind of brought up in proceedings that if they don't do something, then they will get that's what the result will be. Or it will be, I'm going through a fact find soon, I've had an allegation of alienation. So it tends to be sort of a rolling theme that the second that alienation's brought up, they're done for. And it's so strange, because I've had people speak to me and say it was never ever a factor in their proceedings, and one day it was brought up and then within 6 months the kids were gone. And it's like, when you truly think about that, it really makes you wonder how, not wonder, but it kind of gives you a good idea of how this alienation really takes over the scope of what family court does. Someone just asked them what PD12J is. So PD12J is, it's called Practice Direction 12J. Me and Sarah are not legal, by the way. I just want to make that clear. But it is basically the law that is there for family courts to it's essentially to protect, I suppose, really, isn't it, domestic abuse victims?
Yeah, so I'm not a solicitor, so just put that caveat. I do have a law degree and I did train to be a solicitor, but funnily enough, I didn't finish my pupillage because of the abuser many years ago. So I was nearly there, but I am an IDVA. So basically, Practice Directive 12J or PD12J is something that's set out that the court must follow when there are concerns raised by anyone. It doesn't have to be by one party, it could be by CAFCAS, anyone else, of domestic abuse and coercive controlling behaviour. So whenever these are raised, what should happen is, it should, first of all, Practice Direction 12J should kick straight in. And it specifically tells the court not what they should do, but what they have to do, what they must do. But they don't. And the reason they get around it so easily, unfortunately, is what they tend to do is they tend to try to get particularly mothers to drop allegations of domestic abuse, threaten them with alienation or alienating behaviours, and they will say to them, if you drop these allegations, then, you know, everything will be okay. You won't lose your children and blah, blah, blah. So they kind of convince the victim to not have a fact finding, to not follow Practice Directive 12J. But the problem with that is your protections then are gone because you don't have that fact finding. And if they don't follow it, that means that they will send the children or the child potentially for contact with the perpetrator unsupervised. When Practice Directive 12J, if that was being followed, would say, no, you don't do that where concerns are raised. We've got to look at the evidence first and test that evidence. But what the judge will always put in the clauses, you'll always see the same thing. Practice Directive 12J is not proportionate to the end result, which is contact anyway. It won't matter anyway. We find domestic abuse, and they try and get round it by putting these sort of little comments here and there, you know, into the transcripts, into the judgment. So that's how they bypass it. So they're not upholding the law, are they? When they do, they're not up, because that is what it is there for. And what I also find is when they do have a fact finding, when there are allegations made of alienating behaviours or parental alienation, what you tend to find as well is they don't allow mother's evidence in, or whoever is saying there's domestic abuse, but they will allow the alienating behaviours in. So I find that happen. That's quite common as well. I'll let you talk for a minute, Jem, while my dog's having a barking attack.
Sorry, I've had to just I'll go through the I've just seen a couple of comments. I got told to lie on my partner to get my child back, even though I admitted that I lied. I can't really make that one out. I'm sorry, if you could explain that one a little bit better. If the ex is on bail conditions, he has gone to CAFCAS to see my daughter. I'm worried. See, this is an ongoing problem that you do see. You can have perpetrators have criminal convictions and currently be under investigation, and still have full access even, you know, as you mentioned before, Sarah, unsupervised access to very young, vulnerable children. And it kind of, as you've just explained then, that the whole point in PD12J is to put protections in place for the victims and their children. And it's odd to me how so many cases that you see where, you know, perpetrators have got convictions of domestic abuse, that it's also the law now that children are also victims of domestic abuse in their own right. That is completely and utterly ignored in family court. I know people, and I'm sure she wouldn't, I won't say a name obviously, but I'm sure she won't mind me saying, but her ex-partner is a paedophile and has full residency of the children, and the court are aware of this. They know absolutely everything, and you sit there and you wonder what goes on inside them four walls for these decisions to be made. It genuinely, you can sit there and I think you could bang your head against the wall 1,000 times and you'll never get any answer. And it's just, I see loads of comments of people saying it's just an abuser's playground, and I, honestly, I couldn't agree more, to be honest, because I think it's well known, and I also know now of people saying that their perpetrator will do a application. And I was trying to go into a story, but I'll digress with this one, because this one is the one that I was trying to go into. But there's a woman that I was speaking to not long ago, and she had unfortunately been involved with family court with an ex-partner, and the new partner that she was with is no longer with, but had another child. And basically, because that ex-partner knew that she had gotten her child taken from her in family court previously, he was like, well, I'll just do an application and do the same thing. So it's like almost...
That's so common, Gemma. That's so common. I see it all the time where there will be two perpetrators working together. So you have two ex-partners, but you might have had a child with one, and then you went on to have a new relationship, think you've met somebody completely different. But actually, it's like going from the frying pan into the fire, and then you meet this guy when they're abusive then, and that relationship ends. I've seen it many times. The perpetrators who never knew each other before, they will get together as well, and they will work together to discredit as well, to discredit the mother. And I have seen that happen, quite a few instances as well. I think somebody was just asking, I was just saying there something about social workers as well, you know, lying in reports and putting untruths in the report. And the issue with making complaints about them is that the system is not built to protect the victim. It's not built to protect the individuals. It is built with their legal team to protect their organisation first and foremost. So it's very, very difficult to make a complaint against CAFCAS, social services, you know, local authority, because they all sort of clamp down and close ranks. Legal team is always involved in everything they're doing, and there's a reason legal team are in there. They don't want to be sued, they don't want any trouble, they just want to close ranks, nothing to see here kind of attitude. So they'll play it down, they'll belittle it, and the problem with that is they're so interested in protecting their own organisations is that they won't then go on to hold their hands up and say, well, we've made a mistake here in this report, or we've got this wrong, we'll correct that, which would be the right thing to do. But that's not what they do. They all close ranks. And I think that makes it very, very difficult to hold anyone accountable and to have any level of transparency. You know, and I've also seen many victims where they put in for an SRA, a subject access request, SAR, sorry, and they've been told that they can have it, so it comes back almost completely redacted, you know. So it's very, very difficult. I'm not saying don't try, but in my experience, every time I've seen somebody make a complaint, it's always backfired, and then the ego of the person that they've complained about they sort of take it personally, and then they're even worse. They don't even change the officers very often, you know, the CAFCAS officers or the social workers, once there's been a complaint made. And I've got to be honest, if I was working in a situation where somebody'd made a complaint about me, I think the right thing to do would be to step away and let somebody else with fresh eyes to go into to continue with that case. Surely that's the right thing to do. You know, why would you want to stay on a case where somebody's made a complaint? It's really strange, isn't it?
Yeah, you'd think that would be an automatic thing, really, that you would be taken off the case. It's the same with appeals. When you appeal a family court order, I learned that actually not all the time the judge that you've appealed, say in a case where you've won your appeal, I've learned that they don't actually, that they can go back to that same judge. And it's like, can you imagine the absolute anxiety it would leave you knowing that you've essentially got this judge to be held accountable? I say that word very loosely, accountable. And then you're going back in front of that same judge. Like that, I think it should be an automatic thing that like any professional that you basically do a complaint with or appeal, they are immediately taken off what you know, the case that you have, and grabbing on from the
because the trust isn't going to be there either, is it? You know, that trust is gone. It's going to be gone for the relationship either way, with the judge, with the CAFCAS officer, the social worker. So how can it then be impartial as well? How can something be impartial? You know, and the other thing is making complaints about judges. You basically can't. Because there's only very specific things that you can complain about a judge. Things like them falling asleep in a court. You know, things like that. I mean,
is that a thing?
How can you get anywhere with that mentality if it works like that? You know, there's no accountability at all with the process, and that needs a complete overhaul. It really, really does. And again, to go back to, you know, with an appeal to the same judge that has the same view of you, has already made their mind up about you. It's senseless to me. It can't be impartial, and it can't be non-biased then, can it? You know?
Well, yeah, and I think, as you said, we're all human, and I have a very, I'm trying to word things that's like not going into my case properly, but I have a view, and it's probably a very controversial view, but I have a view that we are all human, and I believe that no matter if you're a judge, no matter if you are a barrister, a solicitor, anyone, you bleed the same as I do. You breathe the same air as I do. If I know that you are essentially going to cause irreversible harm to not only me, but my children, or, you know, let's say not context of me, but other people, their children, you have every right to sit there and say you are making a huge mistake, but you're really actually you're not allowed to do that. You cannot stand up to a judge and say you are wrong. That is not
misogyny, Jemma. It's ego, misogyny. It's that whole, we've done it this way for however many years. This is how we do it. We do it my way. We certainly don't have a woman there telling us what our jobs are. You know, nobody's going to tell me what Practice Directive 12J is. Nobody's going to tell me that I've just breached the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of a Child. Nobody's going to tell me I've breached the United Nations rights for mother and child here. You know, and if they dare do that, my God, you're going to have alienation slapped on you. Yeah, and it is. It is. I see it all the time. They don't like to be told.
No.
And it has to be said, you know, otherwise we're not going to move forward if people don't accept that this is true.
Well, this is the problem it is. With a lot of legal people as well. And again, I absolutely respect everyone who does their job. I could never, ever be a solicitor. I never knew that you went through law. I if I would have known that then, I would have been like, oh my God, Sarah. But it's a hard industry to get into because you've got to have thick skin, and you have. So, you know, I give respect to anyone who's in that industry. But I have a big but with that. I have found in my personal even experience that, and I will say this with, you know, open arms, I have found more barristers and solicitors who actually tell you to play the game rather than advocate for what is right. And that leaves me very uneasy, because if you've got these amazing advocates, you know, these amazing solicitors and barristers who specialise in domestic abuse or you know, children's rights, human rights, but then they're essentially saying to you, if you don't do what they say, you are never going to see your children again. Where will change ever happen if you're constantly if you're just letting it happen? And I know it's not going to be one person, it's never just going to be one person that changes, but can you imagine if we genuinely had a world where even barristers and solicitors were like, what you're doing is abusive, what you're doing is wrong. I'm telling you now, it probably wouldn't end well, but it's kind of, you go into court and you go through your hearing and you get told the worst news ever and you leave and your barrister or your solicitor's like, oh, well, and it's like...
But the thing is, as well, Jem, exactly that, and very often they'll say, it takes me back to what I was saying earlier, they'll say, drop the domestic abuse or you'll never see a child again. So what you're in effect then doing is you're saying, oh, yeah, I won't say that because, I made that up. You might as well, because that's what you're going to be accused of. If you're saying all these things happened and then you're being told you need to drop it, otherwise you'll never see your children again, and then you drop it, what's going to happen then? Why did you say that if it isn't true? You're an alienator, aren't you? You're emotionally harming your children, aren't you? You know, so it plays into that narrative. So they bypass Practice Directive 12J from doing that. And so what we need solicitors and barristers who are going to be strong enough to challenge it. And I would rather have a barrister that challenged it, and I know they did everything for my child and we came out and we lost, than having to pretend that I'd lied or something and say, oh yeah, it wasn't so bad, oh, we belittle it. And you still might not see your child, or you still might have to jump through loads of hoops. You know, so it's very difficult because I suppose they know how it goes, don't they? They see it all the time. They know how it goes. But for me, I mean, I'm not advocating, I'm not telling anyone to do this, but I know when I went through the system, you know, I was very much kind of, I'm not dropping anything. I'm absolutely not dropping anything. But I was lucky in some respects in the outcome that I had, because we managed to prove coercive controlling behaviour, but that doesn't happen very often, does it? You know, that doesn't happen. They don't, you know, it took me 5 years going through the family court, you know. But yeah, it's horrendous. And I do think that the minute people are forced to say that it wasn't as bad as what they were saying, they're just going to be called liars, and, you know, for the court. So it's a difficult one, isn't it? I wouldn't want to back down, but they terrorise women. They terrorise the mothers to back down. They literally terrorise them. They put the fear of God into them, because what is worse than the thought of having your child removed? You know, it's the worst thing ever, isn't it? So it's what a thing to terrorise you with.
Well, yeah, and I think when you go into court, and I think there's a lot of reform that is, you know, that what I would absolutely love to see in family court is to have, you know, just speaking out loud or thinking out loud, I suppose. But when you do an application, or when your perpetrator does, I'll try and dumb it down. I think that the family court should only be for what they would call parental conflict. I think the second that there is an allegation of domestic abuse, child abuse, anything that would ultimately leave in a criminal court's hands should not be in a family court arena. It makes no sense how you can be sitting there with your perpetrator and it is just another form of abuse. And I know we have what they call abuse through litigation. That's a very well-known thing, but I do genuinely believe that family court is its own version of abuse. And the amount of people, I don't think I've heard one person come out and say that they had a breeze through family court. They had a breeze, they went through it, they got everything that they wanted, because that's not real life. And I think if it was a case of where you genuinely just weren't amicable in a relationship, you split up, you just didn't know how to go about things, and then it got to a point where you went to family court, yeah, fair enough. But I think the second that it goes an application, sometimes I sit there and think, I can't believe this is an actual application to give the court the information of your domestic abuse, and still it leads nowhere. When you fill in, I'm not sure if it's a C1 or a C100 form.
C100, yeah, that's the one.
And it literally asks you to entail all of your domestic abuse, what you've been through, possibly what the children have been through. And yeah, that application is probably near enough 9 times out of 10 never referenced again. So it's like, this is a criminal matter. I don't understand how you can be sitting there and fighting for custody with someone who's physically and emotionally and many other abuse has hurt you. It makes no sense. I just don't get it. I don't.
I completely agree with you. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to be in a family court shouldn't be an adversarial system that's going to harm victims of domestic abuse and their co-survivor children who've just fled domestic abuse, to put them in an adversarial system. Unless it's going to be a criminal court where they're going to be prosecuted, they should not have to go through any such thing. And I have actually had a petition going for the last 2 years to say that I don't believe that, women, victims of domestic abuse, usually women, their co-survivor children, should have to go through that adversarial process. They should be being protected, not questioned and treated as if they're criminals, and those perpetrators should be going through, if they're going to be in any court, like you rightly said, it should be the criminal court. And in fact, I would even go as far as to say that if they have to go to a family court and there is evidence of domestic abuse, because that's obviously the burden of the balance of probabilities there. So it's more likely that it happened than it didn't. If it's more likely that domestic abuse happened, they should then have a duty to tell the Crown Prosecution Service so it could go into the criminal court and that they can be rightly prosecuted for coercive controlling behaviour, which is a criminal offence. And so is post-separation abuse. Now, I know Vicky, the CEO of Kaleidoscopic UK, has got a petition out about this to make post-separation abuse a crime in its own right. And I think that is very important that it is, because at the moment it is a crime because the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 changed what coercive control was, in that it's not just in a relationship, it's also after a relationship as well. So it doesn't have to just be in the relationship. So that is post-separation coercive control. But if they had a law that said this is post-separation abuse, then surely then that would stop them from being able to take you to family court and report you to the services, because that would then be identified and seen clearly by all the agencies that that is a form of abuse in itself. And when I hear victims saying, like in the harm panel report and other reports I've seen, oh, they were traumatized by the family court, re-traumatized by the family court, I say, actually, you weren't re-traumatized by the family court. You were further traumatized. It's primary traumatizing straight from them. You were traumatized by those courts, by those CAFCAS officers, by the social workers, by the police who weren't listening to you. And another issue as well that I've heard is that the family court will tell the CPS or the police to drop charges because they haven't found any evidence of domestic abuse. So that's something else I'm commonly seeing. So then there's no criminal charges because the family court have taken over as if they're superior in all this. And all this for the promotion of contact with both parents at all costs, over safety, over everything. How is that of paramount concern for the child? What's the point in a child welfare checklist for CAFCAS to look at and the social workers to look at if they're not going to consider the safeguarding issues and crimes against women and children? It's just, it blows my mind, Jem, and that's why I do what I do, because I can't sit back and watch this happening to people.
It makes you wonder what the, and I think this is an important thing to note as well, that I genuinely think that all the laws that could protect, children and their, parents who are victims, they're there. The laws are already there. They're just not being used. And I think this is the problem that you see a lot of the times. It's almost, like the presumption of contact. Everything, there's when new laws are introduced to kind of put more safety nets in the way there for victims and their children. It then leaves the next questions of, okay, well, if when the presumption of contact comes in, is it then going to result in more allegations of alienation? Is it going to result in more people saying, well, now, because it's not, that presumption of contact isn't directly for victims of domestic abuse. It's there to look at the background and say, right, is contact in the child's best interest? What does it then take for a perpetrator to say, well, there's a law here that says not every parent has a right to a child. I'm going to use that to my advantage now and claim alienation even more. So you've got to really be careful what laws are getting passed and what are actually going to protect.
It's happened in America, Jem. It's not America, sorry, in Australia. That law came in Australia. And many women have reached out to me from Australia and said it's backfired. More women are losing children now than they were before. Now, I get why we had to remove the presumption of contact as a step one. Yeah. That had to go, but it has to come in with getting rid of misogynistic pseudosciences that are going to say, oh, well, she's an alienator, so she's abusive, and then lose a child saying that she's abusive because of that. Exactly what you were just saying there. We need to get rid of any terminology that can be used against the mother. Now, we're lucky in that parental alienation, thank goodness, wasn't put in the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021, classed as alienation, and people fought for that before me. People fought for that really hard. It was going to be put in there, but it wasn't. So we've got that on our side. But however, it doesn't mean that it would be about domestic abuse. All they'd have to say is, well, is the mother being emotionally harmful? Is this going to cause future risk of harm? Which they like to say,
I think that's a big one. They don't even have the proof of the harm. They just think that it might happen in the future.
Exactly. So I think they've got to be very careful with this, that it is fit for purpose. There's the intention of it is to prevent children from ending up with domestic abusers, with harmful people, whether that's emotional abuse, physical abuse, CSA abuse, all that. That's what the intention is. So they've got to remember that in applying the law. And all alienation will do, if they're keeping, even if they're saying not necessarily parental alienating behaviours, mothers in an entrenched position, mothers enmeshed with the child, all these buzzwords and buzz phrases that they use to have the children removed, they've got to get out of the courtroom. They're not fit to be in the courtroom in 2026. They're old-fashioned, old systemic models that social workers are still being taught today. And funnily enough, I work on a volunteer on a panel in Wales. And one of the priorities going forward, I've asked if it can be that we speak to whoever is writing, the framework for social workers. Because even though I go into universities to train them, what's undoing that then is that they're being taught about all these old-fashioned models that we keep seeing again and again regurgitated into family court. So we need them to be removed from their syllabus, and we need to look at it in modern evidence underpinning this, not old-fashioned, misogynistic, rubbish, coming through the courts. They're rechurning it out over and over again, and we need to get it out. And I think that is the only way, because it's toxic. It's toxic to the court, and it's toxic to victims of abuse.
Someone said before that bringing in coercive control legislation without judges or authorities understanding it is a problem, and that I couldn't agree with anymore, because again, it's okay bringing all these laws out, but when you've not got judges, social workers, Kafka's caseworkers, guardians who actually understand it and have empathy, because I think that goes a long way in these jobs as well. You hear about people all the time. I mean, look at that, what's just happened to Preston. It's a situation of where you have these authorities who are actively involved, and I think I did a post about it because I was so utterly devastated of yet another child to add to the list of children that have been failed by social care. But on top of that, this little boy was, you know, he had gone, and I tried to kind of look at it in a way of saying, well, you know, this child had visited hospital on multiple occasions with injuries that for anyone with a sound mind would say, hang on, that there's something not right there. These two men managed to worm their way out of it every time. And you know, this little boy, I don't even think he was fully, you know, mobile. I think he was either he just started walking, or he was, you know, he was very, very little, as we know. Enough to have, I read about the case, and I'll try not to go into a lot of detail because it's a lot more graphic than it says online, than I think the news have portrayed it. Because I went into it because I just couldn't fathom in my head how, you know, we know in the past about baby P, we know about all the well-known cases of these children who are actively failed by social care, but with obviously Preston being so recent, I had a good a nose into what actually had happened and how it had gotten to the stage of what it did. And the hospital every time were like, red flag, what's going on? Why is this child coming to this hospital with these injuries? And every time social care were like, they visited the home and said, looked at him and said, we didn't see anything wrong. And this is where I really advocate for, you know, the surface level presentation of children. If a child is being actively abused by someone, they are not going to sit there and scream and shout that from the top of their lungs. They're not. And no one would. If you know that you are in a hostage situation with your perpetrator right next to you, you're not going to say, yeah, he's abusing me. And especially for children who are already very traumatised by what's going on, if a social worker goes to visit a child, whether that be a CAFCAS, whether that be, you know, anyone who's involved in children's safeguarding, if you go to visit a child and you can see from the outlook that they, you know, look okay, 9 times out of 10, if there's a background of abuse, they're not going to be okay. And this is what was so frustrating. This social worker looked at Preston and said, well, he's not black and blue, so I had nothing to report on, but knew that he had attended hospital on several occasions with injuries that don't happen to a child. And I just can't sit there and fathom it. And when you really look into the case, again, I'll try not to be too graphic because I don't want to end up getting barred off this live, but the sexual abuse that has happened to this child, and the more frustrating thing to me is the surface level presentation of these children that are in desperate need of safeguarding is one of the main reasons why so many children are failed. Because a social worker will look at a child, visit a home and say, well, I didn't actively see the parent abusing the child. The child didn't look like it had just been beaten up, so it must be fine. And then they leave, and then that's it. And it's all so preventable. And I think that is the issue that comes hand in hand with, you know, children's safeguarding, is that so many cases are preventable, and they are. It's just so, it baffles me. It really does.
Absolutely, Gemma. And I mean, it's that talking about that surface level as well, isn't it? That's all they look at. Why don't they dig deeper than that? Because you will even get cases, like, you know, in family court where they've got children who are classed as Gillick competent, you know, that they can tell them what's happened. They, you know, they're very switched on. And if you take them into another room and they're with somebody, an adult they trust, and you think you bring children up, you know, tell an adult if this happens to you or that happens to you. And then they tell that adult, who would be a social worker or CAFCAS officer, and then they don't believe them. And this is what happens in family court all the time. Then they say the mothers coached them into saying it. And then they not only don't believe them, but they very often will remove those children from that situation and give them to the person that the child has just said could have been CSA, for example, you know, terrible things. And so, you know, I get, like, in some cases, for example, with Sarah Sharif, okay, They said with Sarah Sharif that she said she wanted to live with her dad. Well, was her dad in the room when she said that? Had he conditioned her? So it's looking at the deeper level, isn't it? As you say, it's not that surface level. You know, some children will tell you, and you just need to understand, read the bloody room. What are you trained to do as a social worker, as a child protection officer?
This is what I'm saying. It's so confusing how they're just doing these reports after reports and stating that they've seen things, and what you've just said just bang on, because there's no, for me personally, and I'm sure a lot of people agree, when you have a child's case in front of you and you can see an extensive background of an abusive parent, you don't just take that, oh well, he looks all right, so I'm just gonna get on with that. It's like, this is what causes children to die and to be put in situations that they should never have been put in. And it's one of the things that I'm really, really looking into and doing a lot of research at the moment, because I'm trying to find what kind of tool guide that social workers look into. And I've recently just been told that I think it was from someone that I think we know together, to be honest, but they said that they didn't, so in their professional job, they didn't report back to social care on something that a child had admitted to this person, because they knew that social care wouldn't carry it out. So they knew that them telling social care would actually end up leaving the child in a worse position, because the parents would have had to have been informed that the child has made an allegation, and then social care would have had to have gone out. And then, can you imagine then the social worker being like, well, your child's reported this and has divulged this to another professional, we've got to come out now and do a safeguarding check. And then can you imagine what that child is then going to go through in the home? And it's like, you've got actual real professionals who care so deeply about children find that to actually safeguard the child is not to go to the safeguarding body that's regulated to do so. And it leaves your mind blown. It does. We don't have a moderator.
It does, Jem. It's absolutely shocking. No, we don't have a moderator, I don't think, unless I don't know if Rachel's in the chat. I'm sure I saw Rachel foster there somewhere. If you fancy being a moderator, Rach, we need one. I was going to say, in terms of the impact, Jem, of what happens in family to court, I was going to ask you about that next, about that sort of impact that you see on the lives of the children, and usually the mother, where they've had their children removed, or even if they haven't, where they're forced into that shared care.
Yeah.
Which means they have to co-parent, which is impossible with a perpetrator. You can't co-parent with an abuser. But you're either going to be in that position, aren't you, where you're forced into that contact with somebody who could have been your rapist, for example. You know, and I'm just wondering, you know, the impact of that must be horrendous. And I hear from victims on these impacts. I don't know if you do as well. I'm sure that women speak to you about the impact it is having on their life, you know, having to go through this. And I was just wondering what you're hearing from them, and, you know, if it's similar to what I'm hearing. I'm sure it is.
Yeah. I have people get in touch with me to say that they've had their children start self-harming, refuse to eat, refuse to go to school, which then again backfires on the parent who they're living with. I've known of people to say that their children who are now 17, 18, 19 are still going through therapy and have been told that now they have a lifelong mental health condition, because, and this is what I've said to people, and I think we mentioned this at the vigil when we did one of the interviews, is that when you finish family court, whether you finish with a result that you wanted or not, the process of family court, it's debilitating. And I always say to people, it's a life sentence. If once you get that family court application and you know that you've been a victim of domestic abuse, and you are going to be going into family court and fighting for whatever you are with your perpetrator, you are going to have a life sentence of pure trauma. And it it carries you for life. And as I said, my mum, well, as I don't, I wouldn't have thought she'd mind me saying this, but my mum went through it, and I think for her now to see that her daughter's living through near enough the same type of situation, it's like that still carries on with her. And my mum, I won't say her age, but she's not a spring chicken. Do you know what I mean? And that's still something that still today it affects her so much. And you kind of sit there and you think, and I think you mentioned this right at the beginning of the live, what support is actually there for people who have gone through domestic abuse or who are going through family court. And I've recently been in touch with a charity who specifically deal with children who have been victims of domestic abuse. I'll put their tag in this, but the work that they do, because you see very often charities and things out there for people who have been victims of domestic abuse, but you very, very little of the time see the help when either you're going through family court, because as you said, you're not allowed to talk about it, or even after family court, you're just given to your nearest mental health practitioner, who will say, well, you've probably got PTSD or depression from going through it. But there's no actual therapeutic work that comes from the absolute torture of going through family court. And lifelong damage, and it's irreversible. You're never going to get over it, because I know in my case, and again, I'll try and say it very loosely, I'm never going to get back the 6 months that I've lost, and that's something that I have to accept, and I should never have to have accepted that. And it's knowing that these victims, myself included, there is nothing more that we could have done. And I think that's also, you're being put in a position where, as you've said this a lot throughout the live, you are told when you're a victim to go and speak to the police. When you speak to the police, they say NFA. And then when you go to family court, they wave in with that paper that says, well, I haven't done it, so give me access to me kid. So it's like, it's a never-ending vicious cycle of... But I also found out recently as well that apparently, I can't remember who told me it, so I can't verify it for certain. Someone might know in the comments. But if you speak about your criminal proceedings in family court, or if you divulge something in family court that can relate directly to criminal court, it can't be used. So whether that's right or not, I don't know. But it's something like, they say, for example, someone had said, well, he or she had hit me. And then they tried to go to the police with that wouldn't then be able to be used.
Well, I've heard where somebody I knew, they went to the family court, coercive control was established in that case, and domestic abuse. And then for years it was also going on in the criminal court. And this lady, she had to pay £22,000, I think it was, for a court transcript in the family court, and to ask permission for the family court if she could give that evidence to the police and the CPS. By the time she got granted that, it was over time, apparently. It was out of time. So, I mean, I hear these stories from people that I know, people that I trust, I see it happening, and I know it's happening. It is happening, and it's not fair. It's not fair. How is justice ever going to be done? And for a better word, that level of almost corruption, they're preventing you from justice being done, aren't they? It's like they go to all lengths to stop justice being done. And it's no wonder the 2 to 3 women are being murdered every week in England and Wales alone, because they're not taking it seriously. And there are people going to great lengths to prevent prosecutions. And, it blows my mind, Jemma. It really does. And talking about, some of these, the impacts that we see, there's the other thing then, isn't it? We're talking about therapy. And there's no therapy that will ever get you over, I don't think, family court. I don't think there is, if I'm honest. I mean, I've got CPTSD myself, and I think it's something I'm always going to have to manage and live with, probably for the rest of my life. With the children, there's been school refusal, for years, all sorts of problems which started when we were going through the family court system. But there's that therapy, isn't there? There's that other therapy that these not children, that the mothers usually are forced to undertake by the family court. They're forced to pay extortionate amounts of money for this therapy in some cases, and they're not allowed then to see their children until they have completed this expensive therapy. Now, talk about a breach of, the United Nations rights. Talk about a breach, not the United Nations, sorry, the European Convention on Human Rights. Article 6, right to a fair trial. Okay, so how do you have a fair trial if you can't access legal aid? You can't. So what happens then is you end up having to borrow money or sell your home, or you start using food banks, you lose your career with the stress, finances, economic stability gets worse, and then you end up in a situation after you've nearly gone bankrupt, and then they're saying to you, now you're an alienator, you've got to pay therapy as well, and it's got to be this particular therapy that's not available on the NHS, it's only available through private practice, and here's a recommendation, and there's always the same names springing up of these psychologists to give you therapy and assessments. It's always the same names, isn't it? And how are they supposed to afford that if they have borrowed all the money they can borrow for their legal fees, they've sold all their assets, they've got nothing left, their credit rating has plummeted, they've been abused with the child maintenance system as well very often, loss of career? How are they supposed to fund this therapy in order for them to see their children again? And then, not only that, then when they're allowed to see their children again, it's got to be supervised, and it's got to be through contact centres. And guess how much that's going to cost? A blinking fortune, from what women have been telling me. Not only the petrol to get back and forth, which we know is through the roof anyway, but also the contact centre on top of it, just to see their own children who they've lived with since they were born, until this happened to them. They were getting on fine with their children until the family court was imposed on them. Talk about all the breaches there of the United Nations conventions, of human rights. So many breaches there. They're not able to enjoy family life. They haven't been able to have a fair trial. They've been put into poverty, directly into poverty. The state won't help them because they've got maybe assets or something with their ex-partner. It becomes so complicated needlessly. If they just followed Practice Directive 12J from the start and did what they're supposed to do according to the laws, these victims and their children would be protected. But they don't. And that is, it's a crime in itself, isn't it, that this should happen? It's so preventable. This is all so preventable, It
really is, and I think that's it's the gold of it, really, isn't it? It's the fact that you've got, as I said before, that there's laws in place to prevent this, but there's always somewhere a loophole that gets used. Someone wrote in the comments just then, did he pay? Do what was it? Hang on. Someone put. Oh, I can't find it now. Oh, do mothers pay for supervised visits? As Sarah's just said, then I think it is a very known thing that you've got to pay for that contact centre. So,
even when there's been domestic abuse sometimes found or admitted to, and even if the perpetrator does have to have supervised contact, very often I've seen the victim having to pay half when they don't even want them to have contact, because they shouldn't have to have contact with an abuser in the first place. But I know that sometimes I've seen them having to pay half of that, which is appalling.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the problem that I think a lot of people see, is that the crimes that these people are saying in family court are the prison sentence worthy, but the family court treated as and what annoys me with the family court as well, is the fact that an allegation that's made, their fact find is treated like gold dust. It's like, oh, well, if we found that there's no findings, they definitely can't have done it. And it's like, it makes you sit there and think, like, they clearly have this this view of family court as being top of the line, and you can't do anything. And really, it's been working for them, because what's actually happening to stop? But I see it all the time where, you know, fact finds are done, and they go, well, we didn't find anything, so that means that everything can be done. And there's so, you know, very serious crimes that are given as allegations in fact find hearings. But then you can have someone who has been fully convicted. I've known someone actually to have their perpetrator have the full convictions in criminal proceedings, and not one of them was found in family court. And it really makes you sit there and think, what do they do?
But the burden of proof is different. So that doesn't even make sense, because ultimately it's got to be proven beyond all reasonable doubt in a criminal court.
Yeah.
In a family court, it's just got to be on the balance of probabilities. It's more likely than not that they've committed it. So if they've been convicted in a criminal court,
it does, because it makes them.
why are they giving children to convicted perpetrators to promote that relationship above all else, you know? And I just don't think any of us can get over the shock, can we, really, of this circus.
No, and everyone who messages me, I always think to myself, right, I've seen it all now. I've seen it all. Even my own case, I sit there and I think, oh, like, you know, it baffles your head. But every day, someone will message me with something that makes me go, what on earth? Like, genuinely, when you think you've seen it all, you haven't. You haven't.
Do you know, Jem, what did I say? I saw a meme once and I put it up and everyone was laughing at it. It was just something silly like a pig flying, you know? And it was like, yeah, before family court, I would have had questions. But now there are no questions, because it's like anything can go once you've been in the family court, you know? And I laugh, but it's of great seriousness. And it's, you know, I laugh so I don't cry. Really.
I'd be in a pit of despair if I didn't try and make light of it, because you can't live through this. And I think the amount of, and I said this to my husband the other day, like, the amount of people that you probably walk past in a day that are either going through family court or have been through it is probably so many more than you realise. And you can never tell, because it's just so secret. You just can't talk about it. So you've almost got to protect yourself, because if you go out there, and you said this right at the beginning, if you go out there and start shouting and screaming that family court have done this, see you later, you're in prison, or or you've got a fine that you can't even pay. The amount of people that I know who have been in contempt of court because they are so terrified of this person having contact, and then they've had to have, I know people who, as you mentioned before, I know people that have lost their homes. I mean, you did as well, didn't you? You went through that.
Yeah, I had to sell my home because I got into severe legal debt. It was just, and the problem is it's not just the legal debt you're paying. Let's say a single mum who's fled domestic abuse, you know, you're looking at, I don't know, £1,000 maybe to cover everything. You've got your kids as well. At that point, you know, you're trying to cover everything a month. But then you're trying to find £1,000 to £2,000 alone just to pay your legal fees. So, you know, so it just depletes you. And then before you know it, you're in debt with your gas, your electricity, your council tax, if you're paying council tax, you know, your insurances, your car insurance. Then you can't afford to pay petrol. You can't afford to pay food. That stress then means you can't work very often because you can't cope in that environment, which is what happened to me. I had to leave my job. So it was, you know, I remember when I was on benefits, I was using them to pay my legal fees because they still wouldn't give me legal aid. I mean, so I had to sell my home, my house. I had to do that because it was the only way out. It was the only way out, you know, and we were using food banks for the first time ever. And, you know, they might sound like first world problems to some people, but when you've got a bit of money coming in, you're working and you're not having to pay legal fees and, you know, you're managing everything, you can start looking after yourself, can't you, a little bit? You know, you can start choosing healthy foods and for your family, for yourself, keep healthy, perhaps go to the gym or you go for a run and, you know, all these little things, they cost money, don't they, you know? And then when you're going through family court and you've got no money left and all of a sudden you're having to use long life food and food that we know is not healthy for us. I'm so grateful for the food bank, but it's not healthy for you to sustain living off, food for months and months and months off end. My health definitely suffered for a long time from that. Couldn't afford to go to the gym anymore. I couldn't afford to look after myself, my children. I was literally living off food banks and handouts at one point. And that should never have happened. This shouldn't happen to anybody, to end up in a situation where they can't afford to buy basics like food and cover their bills because of the family court.
Yeah, it's the bare minimum of what you expect yourself to be able to live like. And there are people that you literally, with just the story that you've said then, is the fact that you got to a point of where you had to resort to a place that is specifically for people with low incomes who cannot manage day-to-day life with their current income. And you have now been put in that situation where you have no choice but you've been left in a situation where you can't even provide the bare minimum of care for yourself because of that outcome of family court. And I think someone wrote before in the comments about how did they do it? Their partners, their ex-partners have had like really expensive legal and stuff like that. Obviously we can't speak for everyone, but it's a very known thing as well that people who have I suppose unlimited amount of fees, they just keep rolling and rolling and rolling because they know at one point you as the victim, you're going to run out of money. So it's like they'll just keep rolling with that, and it's a system that won't change until we start speaking about it. And I will never, ever, ever sit there and say that anyone who's ever advocated for family court, the changes that have been made have only been made in the right way. They've not been made to have a perpetrator have more rights. Any laws and any legislations that have been put in place have been to protect victims and their children, but it gets to a point of where what haven't we done yet? And I think genuinely it is expose what's going on. And I could never sit there and say, yeah, spill your beans on your court situation, because again, I don't even think a legal profession would do that, and I'm certainly not going to do it. But that's the point where I'm at, because the worst has happened to me and many other mothers that I know, that we're like, nothing's going to change unless we all start talking about it.
Exactly, Gemma, and this is exactly why I do what I'm going to do. I think my biggest following is probably on Facebook, and I'm literally blasting it all the time. I'm calling misogyny out, I'm calling out the family court, I'm calling out judges, I'm calling out Kafkas, and I will keep calling it out, because the more of us that do that, it's going to start getting into the public domain, because, it's not getting out there. I know we've got the transparency scheme, but that is worth nothing, really. I mean, the amount of time it takes to invest in a case, they're not paying the journalists to go in there, and the judges are still not liking them coming in. They're having the final word. It's not transparent. It isn't. So we've got to get this out into mainstream. We've got to get the public to wake up and see what's happened. And when it does, I believe it's going to be a scandal worse than the post office scandal, when they realise what is happening to victims of domestic abuse and their co-survivor children, what they're doing to them behind closed doors and what they're getting away with. I think it's going to be a scandal. The same as when there were forced adoptions. There's still forced adoptions now. The UK government are apparently going to apologise. This is still going on. It's not as if these things have stopped. They've just been adapted and done in slightly different ways. But this is all still going on. So I think exposure is the key, is getting it out there so everybody knows what's going on. And I really do think there's an element of, and I'm going to say it, is shame. They need to be ashamed of what they're doing, I'm afraid. Name and shame. Well, yes, if the cap fits, if they're doing things they know, or they're not preventing things that they should be preventing, and children are consequently dying or being abused because of it, then of course they should be ashamed. These are preventable things, and yeah, I do. And funny enough, my last question to you, Jem, was going to be, what needs to happen to improve things. So I think we've probably answered that one, haven't we? I think.
Yeah, I always say to people, it's exposure, and I think there needs to be a lot more legislations and possible laws that hopefully can get put in place where ultimately there still is a safeguarding aspect to having children remain anonymous, but also that coming hand in hand with these decisions that are being made are known to the public. I genuinely do think that if it was to be known how many children and how many victims are being put through such torture on a daily basis through the hands of family court, I don't think that it would happen as often as it does. And I think there needs to be a lot more things in place when it comes to the removal of a child from a primary carer or parent, because that is such an extreme order to make. And I think normally, I think it is literally in the Children's Act. It's in one of the acts that all orders or the order of removal has to be a last resort of a judge to make. That is the resort that they've clearly tried and tested every other possible order that can be done. In many cases, that's not the case at all. And I think if it ever gets to a point of where there is either a suggestion or a recommendation or an order that's being tested for the removal of a child, it needs to be in extreme dire circumstances, but not just overseen by a judge and by CAFCAS. It needs to be more.
The problem is they're not qualified.
No.
CAFCAS are social workers. Social workers are not qualified in abuse.
No.
How can they go into child protection when they don't understand the dynamics of domestic abuse? Exactly. And how far-reaching domestic abuse is in so many households, behind so many closed doors, How can they not be taught that as part of their main curriculum then, if you like, the main core part, And yet they'll teach them about all these old misogynistic, parental alienation, Richard Gardner type of models and theories. It's out of touch completely. They don't understand. And if they do understand in any way, they're not acting on it. They're not showing us they understand in any way, the way that they're acting.
No, I think there needs to be a lot more of a system involved that isn't just as simple as an order that's being made to remove a child. I don't think it should be as simple as this fact find is supposed to do that, but I think they what's the word that I'm looking for? I think they take advantage out of the fact finding system. They kind of say, well, we've made no findings, so that's what our backbone is. So I think there needs to be a lot more involvement of authorities that are involved in a child's life, whether that be school, regulated psychologists, IDVAs, ISVAs, any type of body that is there to safeguard a victim and a child should be involved in the decision making. I would believe that until the end, because as you've just said, then you could have a guardian from either NIAS or CAFCAS, and they've only ever met the child maybe once or twice. And then you have schools who are with the child every day, Monday to Friday, most days, and they are there actually probably the one source of a child that's a stable environment that gets completely overlooked, when really they're the people who could probably understand the child the most. And I think that they should have a lot more involvement of, if that order is being made or looked at, it's not just left to someone who's actually never met the child, which is the judge, and then someone who's never actually got a full account of a child's life. So that is what there's a lot of things that I think I could go into, but I'm trying to look into how I can get it all put into one. I think I was discussing it with you the other day about trying to get a law passed of having, if that order is made, or even try and put that as a secondary law and have, as soon as you go into proceedings with a domestic abuse allegation, it's not as simple as, yeah, you have a hearing and then you discuss about contact. I think we need to do it right, and that's another thing, that we can't just go into it with what I'm doing now and kind of just splitting off all these ideas. There needs to be a concrete plan of real change, and until that happens, I do think they're just going to keep overruling us. And I do genuinely, we need more people, and people who comment on my Facebook posts and Instagram and they're like, what do I do? And I always comment, expose. Don't shut up, expose, because we're not going to get anywhere unless we do. And so, yeah, and I might as well ask you the same thing. What are you, to end it, the live, what would you suggest, or what do you want?
Well, I think everything you said, really. And I mean, you know, it's so unmeasured, isn't it, to remove a child from a mother that they've lived with. We all know that there is a sacred, really important attachment between a mother and child. There's a pregnancy. The mother makes milk to then go on and feed the child when the child is born, okay? There is a huge attachment bond, a natural attachment bond between a mother and a child. So much so that in the animal world, there are rules and regulations about when you can actually separate a child from an animal, a pup from its mum. You know, so why on earth are human beings in a situation where they can just have children removed like that from such a important attachment with, you know, with their mother? You know, and if the child has lived with their mother for all of their life, and then they're accused of something like parental alienation, let's just, I don't believe in this parental alienation. I believe it is a pseudoscience, but let's just say now, play devil's advocate, even if, right, one parent was trying to manipulate the child against the other, is it really measured to remove that child as lived with their mother for their entire life as a punishment for the mother? That's not child-centered, is it? As a punishment for the mother, how dare you? I'm going to put this child now because you did that with the father. How is that measured, child-centered, child-focused? You'd obviously put in some work if that was going on, but you wouldn't just take the child and give the child to somebody else, would you? Whoever they may be. It's not normal. It's not right. It's not natural. It's ridiculous. It's outrageous, you know. So that's my thoughts on that. I don't think that's measured at all. Again, I think it's all about transparency. Looking at, I'm just going to very quickly touch on the Pathfinder before we go. So the Pathfinder was set up because it was responding in response to the harm panel report. Okay, so they've had this Pathfinder pilot, which they've rolled out now all over Wales. It's in Wales and it's in Dorset and it's in other places now in England as well. And it's eventually going to take over all the legacy courts, all the old family courts. But all the Pathfinder is an IDVA or somebody from the Domestic Abuse Services comes in early, makes an assessment if they're a domestic abuse. They write up that assessment, put it in the court bundle, and the CAFCAS officer looks at it and decides whether she's going to take it seriously, and if not, it's never to be seen again. It's put at the back of the court bundle. So what they have done, they've ticked the box in that they've got the experts in at an early stage, but what they've done is they haven't given them any authority. They're disregarding them as if they're nothing, and they again giving CAFCAS, NIAS and social workers that final say, if you like, on whether it should be relevant to go into the court. So if an IDVA assesses somebody at high risk, the judge may never know about it if the CAFCAS officer disagrees. The CAFCAS officer was not qualified in domestic abuse. So I think we really, really need these coercive control experts and domestic abuse experts in the family court from day one. They need rights of audience, so they're allowed to speak in court. They're not allowed to speak in court. They can't speak up at the moment. They need to have much more respect within that courtroom, because if they're not respecting the coercive control and domestic abuse experts, then they are absolutely not going to respect the victim, the vulnerable victim of domestic abuse that's just been pushed around the court. They need that respect and they need that authority so that somebody can really, truly advocate and know what they're talking about. Is there abuse in this case? Yes or no? Yes, because the evidence is there. There we go to the court straight away. That's what needs to be done. The Pathfinder doesn't do that, and it gets everything sent through that court much, much quicker as well. So whereas the government is saying at the moment, oh, well, the backlogs are down, you know, there's not so much backlog now, everything's going through more quickly. Well, I'm sorry, if it's not fit for purpose, it should not be rushed through more quickly at all. It needs to be fit for purpose, and evidence, most importantly, needs to be tested and taken seriously, you know. They need to act accordingly, I think, with that evidence. So that's my final thoughts. Preaching over.
Yeah,
I'm rather passionate about this, Jem. I don't know if you can tell.
Yeah, I can, and we need that. We do, you know. It's all right going through it, but they say lived experience is the best type of experience for anything, and I think the fact that there are so many more people who are coming out and being so headstrong and you know, finding that courage to speak out. It's absolutely amazing. And then it's to remember, you know, and put your thoughts as well, all the people who are just so utterly destroyed by the system. And I think you've got to we've got to do this, and we will. And I do genuinely think that we will. I do think there'll be change. We just need to get it right, and we do, and we will. I think we will.
We will, Jem. We'll keep going. We'll persevere, and that's the way. Just never give up. We just got to keep going with it. Yeah. Got to keep going with it, and we've got to keep pushing these changes through until they're fit for purpose, and until they protect every victim of domestic abuse and their co-survivor children. They've got to be protected, you know. Yeah. Well, I think that's it. Is it, Jem, for tonight? I've exhausted myself in this heat.
I know. We're going straight to sleep now, just going off. But no,
I'd like to say as well to everyone, thank you so much. I'm so sorry. We weren't ignoring everybody. We were just so involved in this conversation. I just want to say thank you so much to everybody for joining us. And, you know, I have been looking at your comments all the way through as well. And, you know, it's so valid, and it validates what we're saying as well, you know, because we're not only seeing that from the victims that come to speak to us, but we can see that from your comments as well, you know. So thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate you all being here.
I don't think there's any more, but so you can go on to servers, which is PEEPSA, and mine is Raina Advocacy, and I think you're just PEEPSA on all platforms, aren't you? You're not anything else.
Yeah, PEEPSA. I've also got a website, which is www.peepsa.org. So that's my website. So you can see what we do. At the moment, we're not supporting survivors. Well, we're not taking on any new survivors at the moment because we're waiting for funding. But what I am doing is I'm raising awareness every day. I'm lobbying government, parliament, you know, I'm campaigning, I'm training survivors, and I'm trying to get as much awareness out there as I possibly can. But there is a community between Raina, PEEPSA, Right to Equality as well. There are other organisations out there as well as ours where you can at least have that sense of community and not feel alone, and just know that we are here for you all as best we possibly can be. You know, we can't fix every case. God, I wish we could. You know, I get so many emails coming in, you know, every week, and I can't get back to everyone. But believe me, I feel it, I hear it, I read it, I know, and I'm doing everything I can to give you all the best chance. I really am fighting for you. I want you all to know that. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
is there anything you want to add, Jem?
No, it was just, I was just going to add that really about, I've seen a little bit over on socials within the past night of you know, people getting a little bit frustrated, which in a sense is rightly so, but then at the same time it's got to be understood that, you know, you are doing what you can. And I think it leads very much on you're only one person, and I'm only one person, everyone's only one person. And I think that's a nice little way to end it, to say that, you know that I think it's nice for everyone to know that we are trying, and we genuinely are. But I think it's, especially you, I can't imagine the amount of messages that you get in a day. I genuinely can't. But I think
I bet you can, Gemma. I bet you can, because I can just imagine you're getting as many. My goodness.
I get some, I do, and again, I try and respond.
100,000 cases mine going through a year, so about 56,000 of those are private family court, and I think about 50,000 are public law. And remember, a lot of those cases start off in private law, and many of them do end up in public law. So we can't we can't sort of speak to 100,000 people's emails, but what we can do is we can try and change a system so that people are not ending up in this position as well.
Yeah. I think it's just a nice little way to end it, to say, you know, we can see, we can, it's just, we can't, you know, the fight is going on, whether we let you know that personally or not, the fight is there and we won't stop. And I think that is just the way it is. But no, yeah, honestly, I think we will do this again, and we'll try and get a little bit more of a question type thing next time with everyone. But because there was quite a lot of questions, as you say, that we weren't able to answer. But no, it was brilliant. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate it, and we'll let you know very soon if we're going to have another live. I'm sure we will, Jem, won't we?
Yeah, we will. We will. So thank you.
Good night, everyone. We'll see you all soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, how's my going?
And what?
Bye, everyone.